Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? Oh, wow. That was a nice one. Okay.
For 3 decades, Will Smith seemed untouchable. He was laughter in human form, the hero who could save the planet with a grin and make pain look easy. His charisma filled screens and hearts across the world. Yet behind that perfect smile was a man collapsing under the weight of his own legend. The tragedy of Will Smith is not that he fell from grace, but that he spent a lifetime performing happiness to escape the fear he carried since childhood. This is not the story of a fall. It is the story of a man finally meeting himself. The boy who watched the world break. Long before Hollywood lights touched his skin, Will Smith was a child in Philadelphia, growing up in a house filled with love that came at a cost. His father, Willard Carroll Smith Sr., was a man of structure and control, a refrigeration engineer who believed discipline kept the world from chaos. His mother, Caroline Bright, was calm, educated, and determined to create order through intellect. Together, they built a home that looked steady from the outside but trembled beneath the weight of silence and anger. One night became his origin story. He was 9 years old when the shouting began again. His father's voice filled the air. His mother's plea followed, and then came the blow that changed everything. She fell, and he stood there, frozen. He did not move, did not scream, did not protect her. He just watched. That single moment carved itself into his soul. For decades, he carried it like a scar only he could feel. He later wrote that it was the precise moment he decided to become funny, to become safe, to become everything his father was not. Humor became armor. If he could make people laugh, maybe they would stop yelling. Maybe the world would stop hurting. He learned to shape words into smiles, to use rhythm and wit as a shield. Every joke was an act of self-preservation. By high school, he was known as the class clown. But beneath the laughter was an anxiety he couldn't name. Music offered release. He began rapping with his childhood friend Jeffrey Towns, later known as DJ Jazzy Jeff. Together, they wrote songs that felt like sunlight, playful, clean, catchy. Their success came fast. The duo won the first ever Grammy for Best Rap Performance. Will was still in his early 20s, rich, adored, and convinced he had outrun the pain of his childhood. But success hides danger when you never learned how to stop performing. Money vanished as quickly as it came. The IRS seized cars, houses, and pride. For a brief time, the man destined for greatness was broke and humiliated. He thought he had lost everything, unaware that he was about to be discovered again, not by chance, but by timing that felt almost divine. At a party hosted by Quincy Jones, Will was asked to audition for a new sitcom idea. He was unprepared, nervous, yet desperate. He performed in the living room with no script, using only instinct and charm. Within minutes, he had the role. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was born. The show turned him into a cultural icon. Millions laughed every week, but none could see that the character he played was his therapy. The jokes, the swagger, the tears in serious moments, they were all fragments of the boy who had once frozen in that living room. The Fresh Prince became his new armor. He had learned to turn pain into performance, and performance into purpose. But when laughter becomes survival, where does the real person go when the audience stops cheering? Building the perfect man. When The Fresh Prince ended, most actors would have taken a break. Will Smith saw only a new mountain to climb. He reinvented himself as an action star, one of the first black actors to dominate global box offices. Bad Boys exploded onto screens. Independence Day made him a household name, and Men in Black turned him into a symbol of cool. He became the face of optimism itself, the man who could save the world and still deliver a punchline. Behind that confidence, however, was the same little boy chasing safety. He once admitted that his obsession with success was fear disguised as ambition. He feared being ordinary. He feared being powerless again. Fame became his armor, and the bigger it grew, the smaller he felt inside it. He worked relentlessly. Every script was analyzed, every decision weighed against how it might affect his image. He had no scandals, no chaos, no mistakes, just relentless polish. The world adored him, but perfection has a way of erasing the person underneath. Critics began to call him predictable, too clean, too careful. To prove them wrong, he took on roles that drained him emotionally. Playing Muhammad Ali in the 2001 biopic pushed him beyond exhaustion. He trained for over a year, learned to fight, to speak, to move like the legend himself. The performance earned him an Oscar nomination, but left him hollow. Then came The Pursuit of Happiness. Acting alongside his real son Jaden, Will relived the pain of childhood through a father's eyes. The subway bathroom scene, where his character breaks down while holding his son, wasn't scripted emotion. It was Will confronting every failure he had ever feared. When audiences cried, they were crying with him, not for him. The film's success gave him what he thought was peace. But peace built on applause fades quickly. He chased one perfect role after another. Hitch, I Am Legend, 7 Pounds, trying to hold on to relevance, control, and love all at once. Each hit confirmed his superstardom. But each morning, he woke with the same question. When does it stop feeling like performance? He had everything the world told him mattered. Yet the more he built his empire, the lonelier it felt inside. And then came the night that tore everything apart. The night the mask cracked. March 27, 2022. The Academy Awards. Will Smith was minutes away from what should have been the proudest moment of his life. The Dolby Theater glowed with anticipation. Cameras swept across his smiling face. The world waited to celebrate him. Then Chris Rock made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head. The crowd laughed, but Will did not. For a moment, the old training kicked in. The performer smiled. But deep inside, a lifetime of humiliation, fear, and silence churned. In an instant, he stood, crossed the stage, and struck Chris across the face. The sound was sharp and final, like a mirror breaking. The audience fell silent. He returned to his seat, trembling with fury, tears forming at the edges of his eyes. Minutes later, he was called to the stage again. This time to accept the Oscar for Best Actor for his role in King Richard. The irony was almost cruel. As he held the trophy, his hands shook. He spoke about love, protection, and family, unaware that the performance of his life had just become the collapse of his image. Overnight, the man once loved by millions became a cautionary tale. Headlines declared the fall of a hero. The Academy banned him for 10 years. Studios paused collaborations. Friends hesitated to speak publicly. For the first time since childhood, Will faced silence that could not be filled with laughter. In interviews that followed, he described the incident as an eruption, a lifetime of restraint boiling over. It was the boy who had once frozen, finally reacting. Years of suppressing anger had turned into a single, irreversible act. He called it a scar that would never fade. In private, he spiraled through guilt and reflection. He isolated himself, read philosophy, meditated, and faced truths he had long avoided. He realized that the perfection he spent decades building had kept him from being human. The slap had stripped that illusion away. The world saw violence. He saw confession. To understand why this moment shattered him, you have to return to the one force that defined every choice he ever made: love. Love as salvation and punishment. Will Smith's love life was as public as his career, yet no amount of exposure could reveal the complexity behind it. His first marriage to Sherry Zampino was brief but transformative. When their son Trey was born, Will promised never to repeat his father's mistakes. But promises made in fear rarely last. As his fame skyrocketed, family became background noise. The marriage ended in 1995, leaving him with guilt that haunted every decision afterward. He once said that divorce felt like failure carved into his soul. Watching Trey grow up away from him reopened childhood wounds. He saw his father in himself, and that realization filled him with shame. Then came Jada Pinkett, the woman who would redefine his concept of love. She was fearless, artistic, and brutally honest. Together, they seemed unbreakable. Their chemistry was electric, their family beautiful, their life extraordinary. They raised Jaden and Willow in an environment of freedom and creativity, a home that celebrated expression. To outsiders, it was paradise. But inside, paradise had its own storms. The pressure of maintaining perfection, the demands of fame, and the evolution of two strong personalities created distance. Jada sought authenticity, while Will clung to the image of unity. They separated emotionally long before the public learned about it. When Jada revealed her entanglement with another man during her talk show, the internet exploded. The image of Will sitting beside her, holding composure as the world dissected his pain, became one of the most viral moments of his life. Yet behind the calm expression was heartbreak. He later admitted that he felt like the world was laughing at his family's suffering. Still, he refused to give up. He called Jada his life partner rather than wife, a sign that their connection had transformed into something deeper than romance. They no longer fit the world's definition of marriage, but they continued to share history, children, and loyalty that endured through scandal. Their story became a symbol of imperfection, and in that imperfection, Will began to understand that love is not control, it is acceptance. Through heartbreak, humiliation, and forgiveness, he began to confront the pattern that ruled his life. Every mistake traced back to one man, his father. The reckoning he had avoided for decades was waiting. Facing the father. In 2016, Will Smith received news that his father was dying of cancer. The man who had both built and broken him now lay in a hospital bed, frail but unrepentant. Will visited often, unsure what he wanted more, to say goodbye or to finally ask why. Their conversations were slow, filled with small talk that carried decades of unspoken tension. Over time, the walls between them crumbled. For the first time, they spoke not as soldier and son, but as two men trying to understand each other. Will realized that his father's violence was not born from hatred, but from fear, the same fear he had carried all his life. In forgiving him, he found a way to forgive himself. When his father passed, he felt both sorrow and relief. The ghost that had followed him since childhood finally began to fade. He no longer needed to prove strength through control. He had learned that forgiveness is not surrender, it is freedom. 3 years later, a medical scare reminded him of mortality. A routine colonoscopy revealed a precancerous polyp. The procedure saved him, but the experience humbled him. Health became his new obsession, not as image, but as gratitude. He began to understand that survival is not about perfection. It is about care. In 2021, his YouTube series Best Shape of My Life documented this journey. Cameras followed him as he trained, meditated, and struggled physically and emotionally. It began as a quest for fitness, but evolved into a portrait of a man stripping away ego. He confessed to exhaustion, to self-doubt, to moments when he questioned everything. Viewers saw not the superstar, but the human being beneath it all. Later that year, his memoir Will completed the transformation. Page by page, he confronted every memory he had buried: his mother's pain, his father's rage, his own fear of inadequacy. Writing became penance and therapy. When readers praised his vulnerability, he said it was not bravery. It was survival. The healing was real, but healing does not erase scars. As he stepped into his late 50s, he learned that peace was not a destination, but a practice. One that required losing everything to understand what truly matters. Rebuild. By the time he turned 57, Will Smith was no longer chasing applause. His Calabasas home, once filled with noise, had become a sanctuary of quiet mornings and steady rhythms. He trained at sunrise, read philosophy at noon, wrote music at night. The man who once measured worth by box office numbers now measured it by how deeply he could sit in silence without anxiety. His fortune remained vast, but he treated wealth as responsibility rather than validation. He invested in education programs, sustainability projects, and independent artists. He no longer wanted to own the spotlight. He wanted to pass it on. His relationship with Jada evolved into friendship and trust. They still celebrated birthdays together, supported each other's ventures, and shared a language only decades of love can create. His children became his teachers. Jaden's experimental art reminded him that creativity needs freedom, not fear. Willow's voice carried vulnerability he once hid. Trey, his first son, reconnected with him after years of distance. They often played golf together, silent but content. Professionally, he returned to acting with humility. Emancipation was a film few expected him to make so soon after the Oscar scandal. It was not a blockbuster. It was redemption through art. The role of a man fighting for freedom mirrored his own life. Critics were divided, but those who watched closely saw a reborn artist, not a fallen star. Then came Bad Boys 4, a return to humor and partnership. The film's success proved audiences had not abandoned him. They had simply waited for him to stop pretending. The laughter that filled theaters was not the same as before. It carried forgiveness. Music became his truest expression. His album, based on a true story, was not a comeback, but a confession. The track, Beautiful Scars, summarized his journey. The realization that pain, failure, and mistakes are not enemies. They are proof of having lived fully. After years of running from himself, Will Smith stopped. What remained was not the superstar or the scandal, but the human being he had been chasing since childhood. The man who finally stood still. In recent years, Will has shifted from chasing applause to nurturing others. He mentors emerging filmmakers through his production company, guiding them not toward fame, but toward integrity. On set, he speaks softly now, listening more than directing, reminding everyone that artistry without empathy is empty. He funds scholarships for young Black storytellers who grew up the way he did, unsure whether their voices would ever be heard. When asked why he does it, he says that teaching is how he finally learned to forgive himself. He has taken long retreats away from cameras, spending weeks in silence at spiritual centers where no one calls him Will Smith. There, he learned that the absence of noise can be louder than a standing ovation. He practices journaling, not to write bestsellers, but to record gratitude. He no longer measures days by productivity, but by peace. Friends describe him as gentler, a man who understands the rhythm of quiet work. When he walks into a room, he no longer commands attention. He shares it. He attends therapy, not for crisis, but for maintenance. He has learned that healing is a daily discipline, not a single revelation. The boy who once froze has become the man who finally allows himself to pause. He often says that stillness is not the end of movement, but its purpose. That silence, after all the noise, is the sound of knowing who you are, and maybe that is the secret to surviving fame, heartbreak, and regret. Learning to stand still long enough to hear your own heart again. At 57, Will Smith no longer performs for the world. He lives in it, quietly, honestly, and completely. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful act of all. The truth behind the smile. Will Smith's journey is a reminder that greatness is rarely glamorous up close. It is messy, uncertain, and often lonely. The child who once hid behind humor became a man who found freedom in truth. His life teaches that no matter how deep the wound, no matter how long the silence, healing remains possible when you face yourself with honesty. He no longer seeks to erase the past. He uses it as foundation. Every scar is a page of instruction. Every mistake, a verse in a larger song. What the world once called tragedy is now testimony. The story of how light survives even when laughter fades. In his quiet moments, he often speaks about grace, the ability to be gentle with yourself even when the world is not. He believes real strength is measured not in the size of your victories, but in your willingness to grow after defeat. Will Smith's life is proof that redemption is not a headline. It is a process, slow and sacred. It belongs to anyone brave enough to face their own reflection. If this story moved you, give this video a like as a tribute to perseverance itself. Comment below with the Will Smith film or moment that changed how you see him. Share this story with someone who's fighting their own silent battle, because his life reminds us that even the deepest scars can become symbols of strength. And if you want more stories of humanity, redemption, and the truth behind fame, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because there's always another story the world needs to hear.